Hi, everyone. Welcome to our devotion for Friday, March 12th. This is the first part of the Transfiguration story. Now, that's a special Sunday of the church year. Transfiguration Sunday is the Sunday right before Lent, because the story in our devotion talks about this is kind of that hinge moment. It's that turning point in Jesus' life, and it's a turning point in this story that Mark is trying to tell us. Everything that's come before has kind of come out of Jesus' baptism, who he is, what he does. Now, this moment in the story, he starts moving towards his crucifixion. And so we're going to read this transfiguration story over the next couple of days. So we start with Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 5 says, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And that's where we're going to pause the story today. We'll read some more tomorrow. Now, usually when I read this story, I think about how, number one, just how fascinating this must have been to see, right? Jesus there, and then all of a sudden changed into this, what we would consider glory, right? This absolute fascination and unbelievable nature. And I have a different conversation about what glory really means when it comes to God and God's work in the world. But I also look at Peter saying, it's good for us to be here, that we get to witness this. And then it's let us make 3 dwellings as this effort to try and keep this event, like to encapsulate it, for Peter to be able to keep it all for himself, right? For at least him, James, and John. He doesn't want to share this with other people. But the other thing that I've noticed as I've read this more and more is that Peter offering to make these dwellings is actually picking up on some of his tradition, some of his religious tradition, and some of those religious practices that he would have grown up with. Right? This word dwellings is the same word for the booths, for the festival of booths that the Jewish people celebrated the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, when they had to live in these makeshift tent buildings that they could pack up and move whenever they needed. So there's a part of Peter saying that he wants to keep this here, but there's also that part of that Peter wants at least to keep Moses and Elijah, but to be able to move just like God was moving, right? Even after the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the Israelites still kept God's tent. And God's tent moved around to wherever the people were so that the people could worship God. It would be like having our church, but then the church would move through Beaver Dam. So it would go to every neighborhood, and that neighborhood could come and worship. And we might stay there for a day, and then we'd move the church to another place. And it's overly simplistic, but that's kind of the idea. So for Peter to say, let us make 3 dwellings, 3 booths, one for you, Moses, and one for Elijah as well, is this idea that right here we can stay on the mountaintop, but we're going to need shelters for us as we take this power and glory down off the mountain. And we need to bring Moses and Elijah down to the people. And of course, they're going to need tents because they're going to stay with us for a long time. Little does Peter know. So this is just a fascinating story. Read the devotion for today that goes along with it. This idea that this is that pivot, this turning point, right? And it talks about things like weddings and new births and graduations that end one thing and start something else. And that's kind of where this transfiguration story is going to go. Let's close with the prayer. Jesus, lead the way, light our path, and give us the courage to shine with your love. Amen. And God bless you today.